There are things in a life that you don't register until you do. And once you do, you cannot unfeel them. A second phone left face down on the kitchen counter. A name said too casually in a sentence that didn't need it. The particular quiet of a man who stops asking how your day went because he already knows the answer to the one question that actually matters. And he's hoping you don't. I had been collecting these things for months, the way you collect lint. You don't mean to. They just accumulate. My name is Abigail. I'm 37 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst for a mid-sized firm in Calgary, and I have been married to my husband Miles for 8 years. He owns a construction supply company, concrete forms, rebar, the unglamorous material that holds up other people's buildings. He is 43, sharp in a boardroom, charming at dinner parties, and very good at knowing exactly what he wants. For a long time, I believed I was one of those things. The trip to Vancouver had been on the calendar since February. Miles had a 2-day industry conference at a hotel on West Georgia Street. The kind of event with expensive lanyards and open bars that close at midnight. He said it would be good for me to come along. We could have dinner at the waterfront. He made it sound like a treat, and I accepted it as one, which is the kind of thing you do after 8 years of deciding which hills are worth standing on. I had taken 2 days off work. I packed carefully. I always do. It's a habit that used to make Miles smirk and say I packed like I was preparing for an expedition. I stopped pointing out that his suitcase had once arrived in Toronto, missing 3 shirts because he'd forgotten to zip it properly. Women in long marriages learn early that not every sentence from a husband requires a response. It was the night before the flight that I found it. Miles was downstairs on a call. The house on Elbow Drive has a particular quiet after 9 o'clock, the kind that carries sound further than walls should. I caught pieces from the upstairs hallway, something about timing, and then, clearly, evenly, she won't check the small pocket. She never does. I stood at the top of the stairs and held my breath for a full 3 seconds. Then I went back into the bedroom. I crouched beside my carry-on, a black rolling bag with a worn handle, and opened the outer zip compartment I usually leave empty. It was not empty. There was a flat pouch inside, sealed with a zip, the size of a trade paperback. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. A USB drive in a brushed metal casing. An envelope unsealed. Inside the envelope, a bank draft, a cashier's check made out to something called 3491027 Alberta Limited for $22,000. And beneath that, a single folded page. A transfer authorization bearing Miles's signature, and a second signature I recognized without needing to read the name below it. Petra. She was his executive coordinator, 31 years old. A logistics degree from the University of Alberta. The kind of professional composure you mistake for competence until you start reading the fine print. I had met Petra at the company Christmas party 3 years ago. She'd shaken my hand and said, "I've heard so much about you," in a way that made me feel, immediately, and without any concrete reason, like I was being managed. I looked at the check. I looked at the authorization form. I looked at the name of that numbered company, and I understood, with the slow clarity of someone who has always been good with numbers, exactly what I was looking at. A numbered company is not unusual in Alberta. Businesses register them all the time, blank shells with no name, just digits. But a cashier's check made out to one, tucked into the hidden pocket of your wife's carry-on, is not an administrative coincidence. Miles was planning to move funds through an entity that didn't bear his name, under the cover of a bag that didn't bear his name either. And if anything was ever questioned, the explanation was already built in. His wife had packed it without knowing. His wife, who has her own employer, her own clean record, her own genuine bewilderment. I took photos of everything on my phone. The pouch, the check, the USB, the authorization form with both signatures visible. Then I put it all back exactly as I'd found it, zipped the pocket, and went downstairs. Miles was on the couch, scrolling. "What time is Petra meeting us at the terminal tomorrow?" I asked. 8:15. He didn't look up. "She'll have the client folders." "Right," I said. "I'm going to finish packing." I didn't sleep for a long time that night. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't feel like grief at first. It feels like arithmetic. You run the same numbers hoping you made an error somewhere. By 2 in the morning, I had stopped hoping I'd made an error. I hadn't made an error. We drove to Calgary International in the kind of silence that gets filled with small remarks about traffic and weather. Miles stopped at a Tim Hortons drive-thru and handed me a medium coffee, double-double, without asking. He still knew how I took it, which was somehow the saddest thing about the entire morning. Petra was already waiting at the terminal. Camel coat, charcoal gray carry-on, the single exterior zip pocket on the front face unbothered by any combination lock. She smiled when she saw us and said good morning to Miles first and then to me, in that order, which told me everything I had already decided I believed. Check-in was smooth. Miles cleared through his Nexus lane. Petra and I joined the main casse line together. She was on her phone before we reached the belt, working through a slide deck with someone at the Vancouver office, voice efficient and unhurried. I told her I needed to grab something from the kiosk nearby before we went through. Go ahead, she said, already pulling off her coat. I didn't go to the kiosk. The terminal was loud in the way airports always are. Layered announcements, the rumble of bag wheels on tile, a toddler somewhere expressing a very reasonable opinion about the hour. Easy to be invisible and all of that. I crouched beside Petra's gray carry-on where it sat on the floor, unzipped the front exterior pocket. It opened without resistance and transferred the pouch from my bag into hers. 15 seconds, maybe 20. I zipped it closed, stood up, joined the belt queue, and started unloading my carry-on, like a woman, with nothing on her mind but her gate time. The CATSA officer, a young man with the patient expression of someone who has seen everything, watched his screen as Petra's bag moved through the X-ray and then said, calmly, "Ma'am, please step aside. We need to take a second look at this." Petra came off the body scanner and blinked. Of course, it's just work documents. Won't take a moment, he said in the flat final tone of someone not inviting discussion. That was when Miles appeared from the Nexus side, jacket over one arm, expecting to find us already through. He walked over when he saw Petra stopped at the secondary table. His stride was casual at first, then less so. Is there a problem here? He said. Sir, please stand back. She works for me. Her bag will have company materials. The officer had already unzipped the front exterior pocket. I was standing 3 meters away, carry-on strap in both hands, wearing the expression of a woman who is mildly curious about a routine secondary screening. I watched Miles's face move through 5 different things in about 2 seconds. Recognition. Calculation. Something that lived close to panic. Then, a very deliberate settling. The face of a man whose whole life has been about thinking faster than the room. The officer lifted the pouch out. Petra shook her head. That is not mine. I have no idea what that is. Could you open this for me, please? She looked at the pouch the way you look at something you know is about to change the day. She unzipped it. The USB in its brushed casing. The envelope. The cashier's check for $22,000, payable to 3491027 Alberta Limited. The authorization form with 2 signatures at the bottom. The officer laid everything on the table with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who has done this before. Miles said, "That's mine." His voice was controlled but thin at the edges. I placed it in the wrong bag. It was meant for my wife. The officer looked at him, looked at me, looked at Petra. I stepped forward just slightly, just enough to be visible, and let my expression do the work, the small frown of a woman encountering something unfamiliar. "Miles," I said quietly, "what is this?" He looked at me. I don't know exactly what he saw in my face. Calmness, probably. The specific calmness of someone who has spent a night running numbers and got the same answer every single time. "It's a bank instrument for a client," he said. I didn't want it mixed in with the company folders. "In my bag," I said. He swallowed. A supervisor was called. Identification was produced. Miles explained the numbered company, named his corporate lawyer, was composed and cooperative in the practiced way of a man who has navigated difficult rooms before. But the thing about airport security is that it does not care how composed you are. It moves at its own pace. And meanwhile, the people standing too deep behind the rope have eyes, and the man, in the navy blazer by the water fountain, has already raised his phone. I checked my boarding pass. I asked the first officer politely whether I was free to continue to my gate. He confirmed I was not connected to the matter. I thanked him and walked. Miles caught up to me at the gate after whatever conversation had to be concluded had been concluded. Petra was not with him. I didn't ask. He sat in the seat beside me, and for a long moment, he said nothing. "You found it," he said. "I'm meticulous when I pack," I said. "You've always known that." He pressed his lips together. "Let me explain on the plane." He did try. Seat 24C and 24D, row over the wing, 1 hour and 45 minutes, Miles explained. The numbered company was a vehicle for cycling capital. Not illegal, he said, if structured correctly. Petra had established it through a business contact. The bank draft was for a supplier payment that needed to move under a different entity to avoid a contractual audit clause with one of his larger distribution partners. He hadn't told me because it was complicated, and he hadn't wanted me to worry. I kept my eyes on the window. Alberta giving way to the Rockies below, white and absolute and completely indifferent to row 24. Why my bag? I asked. 3 seconds of quiet that were 3 seconds too long. If it was in my bag, I said, and someone asked questions, the answer would be that your wife had packed it by accident. Your wife who has her own employer, her own clean record. No one would look further. That's not what. Is any part of that wrong? He didn't answer. I turned to look at him. 8 years of breakfasts and grocery lists and Saturday mornings. I understood looking at him that this was the hardest part, not the anger, because I didn't feel angry exactly. I felt a cold and very precise grief, like arriving at a place you had been trying not to go. Tell me about Petra, I said. Not the company, you and Petra. He looked out his window. It started about a year ago, he said. His voice was flat, with the flatness of someone who has stopped choosing words carefully. It wasn't supposed to be serious. And the numbered company. She set it up. She manages the paperwork. So she is not, in any real sense, just your executive coordinator. He said nothing, which was the answer. I went back to my window. The mountains were behind us. The descent had begun. The hotel room had a partial harbor view, as promised. Miles tried 3 times in the elevator to begin a sentence and stopped. When we got inside, he sat on the end of the bed and said, "Tell me what you want to do." "I need to call my sister," I said. I went into the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and called Gwen. She is 2 years older than me and a family lawyer in Calgary, and she is the most pragmatic person I know. I did not cry telling her. I had expected to, but I didn't. I just told her what I'd found, what I'd done, what Miles had said at row 24. There was a short pause. "Are you safe?" she asked first. "Yes." "Good. Send me the photos right now. The check, the authorization form, everything." Another pause, shorter. "Abigail, this is not only a marital matter. If Miles is routing funds through a numbered company to avoid a contractual audit, and your name was going to be the explanation, even as a passive cover, there is CRA exposure here. This needs a proper look." CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency. The thought of it made something in my chest go completely still. "What do I do?" I asked. "Be completely normal for the rest of the conference. Do not confront him further until I've reviewed what you've sent. And do not sign anything he puts in front of you. He's not going to put anything in front of me. You would have said the same thing about the carry-on 48 hours ago." She had a point. I sent her the photos, then I washed my face, went back into the room, and told Miles I needed to rest before the evening reception. The reception was held in the hotel ballroom. I shook hands, made conversation about the spring weather in Calgary, ate the past canapes. Petra was there, in a dark green blazer on the far side of the room, clipboard in hand, scanning the crowd with her usual efficiency. When she saw me, she looked away first. A man named Bruce, a lumber supplier from Abbotsford, pumped my hand and told me I should be proud of everything Miles had built. "He's always talking about you," he said. "Always posting pictures of your hiking trips. You two seem like a solid team." I thanked him. I held my sparkling water. I understood, standing in that ballroom with the harbor lights behind the windows, that I had been serving a specific function in Miles's life for quite some time. And the function was not wife. It was evidence. The domestic proof a certain kind of businessman keeps to signal trustworthiness. The hiking photos, the Christmas card, the carry-on. Miles had several drinks at the reception and 3 more at the private dinner that followed. By the time we were back in the room, he was unguarded in the way that alcohol sometimes makes people honest. He sat in the chair by the window. "The arrangement is in trouble," he said. "Not the main company. The side vehicle, Bruce's group, is pulling out of the distribution agreement, and they have lawyers looking at the subcontracting structure. If they trace the capital..." He stopped himself. "You needed someone they wouldn't look at," I said. "I didn't think it would go this far." "Miles, I kept my voice even. You need a lawyer, not for us, for the company. Call someone tomorrow morning before the first session. He blinked. He'd expected something different from me. Tears or ultimatums, or the particular kind of anger that gives a guilty person something to argue against. I'm not your advisor anymore, I said. I'm saying this because ignoring a CRA inquiry is worse than engaging one. After that, it's your problem. I went to bed. He stayed in the chair. In the morning, I walked to a coffee shop on Robson Street and called Gwen again. She had looked at everything overnight. The numbered company is real, she said. Registered in Alberta 14 months ago. Petra is the sole director on paper. The authorization form you photographed suggests Miles is the directing mind. They're both exposed. And me? You're clean. But you need to be able to account clearly for the airport. Your bag, the swap, all of it. I can account for all of it. I know you can. Abigail, what do you want to happen? I held the coffee cup in both hands and looked out at the gray Vancouver morning, the mountains entirely hidden behind cloud. I want to go home, I said. To the house? To Mom and Dad's, for a few days first. Okay, she said. I'll call you tonight. I went back to the hotel. Miles was dressed and ready for the day, laptop bag over his shoulder. When he saw me, he asked if I was all right. No, I said, but I'm clear on things. I need 2 minutes and then you can get to your conference. He stood and listened. Whatever you and Petra have built, end it, all of it, not because I'm asking. Because if the CRA comes looking, a well-constructed story will not fix it. That's not my concern anymore. Mine is this. I kept my voice completely level. What you did with my carry-on was a calculation. You chose me because I was available, and because you didn't think I would notice, and because if I did, I was the kind of wife who would quietly let it go. I need you to understand that you were wrong about that last part. He didn't say anything. When you get back to Calgary, call your lawyer. And then we should talk about calling a mediator. You want a divorce. I picked up my bag. I want an honest conversation, the first real one we've had in 2 years. But yes, I think we both already know how this ends. I changed my flight at the airport. The gate agent was cheerful. The flight was smooth. I sat by the window and watched the Rockies go bright below the cloud line, somewhere over the interior. The peaks, sharp and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in row 24 the day before. What I felt was not relief, it was closer to orientation. The sensation of finding your place on a map that had been confusing you for a very long time. My parents live in Okotoks, 40 minutes south of Calgary. My mother opened the door, looked at my face, and said, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." She didn't ask anything for a full hour. We sat at the kitchen table, and she let me drink tea and look out at the yard where the crabapple tree was beginning to bud, late as always. My father came in from the garage, looked at me, looked at my mother, and went to put more tea on. When I finally talked, I told them the shape of it. Not the legal details, that was Gwen's work, but what I'd found in the bag, what I'd done at the airport, what had been said on the plane. My father listened with his hands flat on the table. When I finished, he said, "You've always been the one who checks her work twice." It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was just a fact from someone who has known me for 37 years. I stayed in Okotoks for 4 days. Gwen called every evening. Miles called twice, and I spoke to him the second time, briefly, and we agreed to use a mediator rather than go through separate litigation. We were both, in the end, practical people, and there was no point performing a war neither of us wanted. Petra resigned from Miles's company the following week. The arrangement with the numbered company was unwound. The CRA inquiry began the way those things do, with letters, and then with more letters, and then with a very long process that Miles navigated with a tax lawyer and a great deal of cooperation, which typically matters. I moved into a rental in Inglewood in June, a small apartment on a street with old elms that I knew would go gold in October. I bought curtains I chose myself from a shop on 17th Avenue, and I stood in the checkout line with them bundled under my arm and felt something I had not felt in quite a while, the uncomplicated pleasure of a small and entirely independent decision. The divorce was finalized 8 months later, on a Thursday, in an office with beige furniture and a plant that needed water. The mediator was thorough. Miles was quiet throughout. In the lobby afterward, he said, "I'm sorry," and I believed him completely, and it didn't change anything, and I said, "I know," and meant that too. Some apologies are genuine and still arrive too late to alter the math. I went back to work the Monday after I returned from Okotoks. My manager looked up when I walked in, assessed something in my face, and said, "Good to have you back," in a tone that asked no questions. There is a particular kindness in people who understand that some things are not their business. The elms outside my apartment went gold that October, right on schedule. I made coffee on a Sunday morning and stood at the window and watched the leaves come down, and I was not sad exactly. I was just present in my own life in a way I hadn't managed to be for longer than I care to admit. There is a version of this story where I tell you I became someone different on the other side of it. Wiser or harder or more careful about who I trust. But that's not quite right. I think I just became more honest about what I had already known. I had been collecting evidence for months before that carry-on. Small, lint-sized things, and setting them aside because the conclusion they pointed to was one I wasn't ready to face. What changed at Calgary International Airport on a Thursday morning in April was not what I found out. It was that I stopped setting it aside. Some people will tell you that walking away from a long marriage means you gave up. Those people have never sat on the edge of a bathtub in a Vancouver hotel room calling their sister because their husband packed their carry-on with someone else's financial instruments and assumed they wouldn't check. Walking away wasn't giving up. It was, finally, after a very long time, paying attention to what I already knew. The elms held their color for 3 weeks that fall, longer than usual. I made coffee every morning and stood at the window and watched them, and I was not waiting for anything. That, it turned out, was the thing I had missed the most.